Welcome to History Telling Official. In 1347, strange ships arrived in the Mediterranean, carrying a disease that would transform Europe forever. The illness spread through ports before frightened communities understood what was happening. Swollen lymph nodes, fever, weakness, and dark skin lesions became terrifying signs of the plague. Fleas living on infected rats helped carry the bacterium from place to place. Fled evil cities were especially vulnerable because crowded streets and poor sanitation created ideal conditions for disease. Sicily, the plague moved rapidly through Italy and into France, Spain, and the rest of Europe. Merchants, travelers, soldiers, and ships unknowingly carried the disease across enormous distances. By 1348, entire towns were watching their neighbors become sick and die within days. Doctors had little understanding of bacteria and relied on ancient theories about poisonous air and bodily imbalance. Some physicians wore protective clothing and masks filled with fragrant herbs, hoping to block the imagined corruption in the air. Families abandoned infected homes as fear spread faster than reliable information. Religious processions filled the streets as desperate people searched for explanations and protection. Then, minorities and outsiders were falsely blamed for the catastrophe, leading to horrific persecution and violence. In some communities, people turned against neighbors they had once trusted. Burial grounds filled so quickly that ordinary funeral traditions became impossible to maintain. Historians estimate that the Black Death killed tens of millions of people across Europe, although the exact number remains uncertain. In Europe, lost a huge portion of its population in only a few devastating years. Fields were abandoned because there were no longer enough workers to cultivate them. With labor suddenly scarce, surviving workers gained bargaining power and demanded better wages and conditions. Landowners struggled to preserve the old social order as peasants became increasingly difficult to control. Governments introduced new restrictions to keep wages and workers from changing the economic balance. The enormous loss of life also changed how Europeans thought about religion, death, art, and society. Artists began creating darker images of skeletons, graves, and the fragility of human existence. The plague gradually receded, but outbreaks continued, returning to European cities for centuries. Centuries later, scientists identified the bacterium responsible as Yersinia pestis. Centon medicine transformed the disease from an almost unimaginable catastrophe into an infection that can usually be treated with antibiotics. The indert Black Death permanently reshaped Europe by changing its population, economy, culture, and social structure. What began with ships arriving from distant shores became one of the most consequential disasters in human history.